Hey guys, tonight we are going to ease ourselves into the chilling reality of one of history's most notorious survival epics, Napoleon's retreat from Moscow in 1800. Picture this, the golden spires of the Kremlin fading behind you, replaced by a vast, indifferent landscape, and the crisp autumn air biting just a little harder than you expected. You're part of what was once the Grande Armée, but now you're just another soul caught in a tidal wave of cold, hunger, and desperation. And let's be real, statistically speaking, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, let me know in the comments where you're listening from tonight and what time it is there. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The order comes down, or maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's just a collective, panicked realization that staying here, surrounded by the ruins of a city you barely held, with winter breathing down your neck, is a fast track to becoming a very cold statue. So you move. You join the swelling current flowing west, a disorganized river of blue coats, tattered banners, and carts overflowing with looted treasures that will soon become just dead weight. The air is sharp, carrying the scent of wood smoke, from fires both intentional and accidental, and something else, something metallic and acrid that you don't want to think about too much. You shuffle forward, caught in the throng. It's less a march, more a stumble, a frantic push and pull as everyone vies for the same patch of ground, the same slightly less muddy spot, the same imaginary advantage in a situation where advantage ceased to exist days ago. Your uniform, once smart and tailored, feels thin now. The August sun that saw you swagger into Russia stays you as a distant memory, replaced by a sky that seems permanently bruised, heavy with unspoken threats. This isn't the glorious advance you signed up for. This is simply leaving. Fast, chaos reigns supreme. Wagons break down, blocking the narrow tracks that pass for roads. Horses, already weakened by lack of forage, collapse in their harness, creating tangled obstacles that desperate men clamber over. Shouts echo, not of command, but of panic, anger, pleading. Make way! My leg! Has anyone seen? But the rest is lost in the general din. You try to keep your bearings, glancing back occasionally. Moscow is a smudge on the horizon, a place you fought so hard to reach, only to abandon it almost immediately. It feels absurd, like a bad joke you haven't quite understood the punchline to yet. The temperature drops noticeably as the sun dips lower. It's only autumn, you tell yourself, but this Russian autumn feels different. The chill seeps into your bones almost instantly, finding every gap in your clothing, every thin spot in your boots. You tighten your worn greatcoat, the rough wool scratching against your neck. It helps a little, but the cold is already a presence, a silent companion that whispers promises of discomfort and worse. You see others shivering, huddled together for warmth that isn't really there. Some have wrapped themselves in looted fabrics, silk scarves tied over their ears, or tapestries draped over their shoulders. A bizarre, tragicomic fashion statement for the apocalypse. It's funny, in a dark, desperate sort of way. Look, I'm freezing. But at least I'm freezing under a velvet curtain. Classic survival chic. You pass soldiers who have already given up, sitting by the side of the road, staring blankly ahead. Are they resting? Are they injured? Or have they simply decided that moving is more effort than they can muster? You don't stop to ask. You can't afford to. Stopping means potentially being left behind, swallowed by the growing void at the rear of the column. The instinct to survive, raw and urgent, overrides any impulse towards camaraderie or assistance. You have to keep moving. For now, that's the only plan. The first hint of something truly terrible arrives not as snow, but as ice. The ground becomes slick underfoot in shaded areas, forcing you to watch every step. Puddles freeze overnight, forming treacherous traps. The breath of your companions hangs in the air in white plumes, thicker and more persistent than they were a few days ago. The transition from crisp autumn to something much more sinister is happening faster than anyone anticipated. Historians still argue whether Napoleon genuinely underestimated the speed of the Russian winter's onset or if other factors, like the burning of Moscow reducing available shelter and supplies, were the primary catalyst for the disastrous timing of the retreat. Well, it feels like that a switch has been flipped, and the setting is now maximum misery. Among the throngs are civilians who followed the army, hoping for protection or opportunity. Now they are just added burdens, their cries and pleas often ignored in the rush. You see carts piled high with unnecessary baggage, silver platters, ornate clocks, expensive furniture. Things that seem valuable in the grand houses of Moscow are utterly meaningless out here. You saw a fellow soldier drop a heavy candelabra earlier, just letting it clatter onto the frozen ground. Nobody even paused to pick it up. What good is a fancy candlestick when you can't feel your fingers? It's a ridiculous scene, honestly. All that effort to drag treasure along, only to abandon it piecemeal. If only they'd looted some extra socks instead. The noise is a constant, low-grade roar. The shuffling of thousands of feet, the groans of carts, the whinnying of distressed horses, the occasional snap of a whip, fragmented shouts, coughs, sniffles. It's the sound of an army dissolving. This initial phase, the escape from the immediate vicinity of Moscow, is less about strategy and more about simple mass movement away from perceived danger. It's a stampede, albeit a slow and freezing one. You feel utterly insignificant, a single particle in this vast, desperate stream of humanity. Your individual fate feels tied entirely to the movement of the crowd, for good or ill. Mostly ill, it seems. You chew on a piece of hard biscuit, the last of your official rations. It's dry and tasteless, but provides a tiny bit of energy. You eye others, wondering who still has food, who is already hungry. The unspoken tension around resources is palpable. A quirky tidbit you might have heard back in the relative safety of the barracks was that Napoleon's personal cook, a renowned chef named Dunant, supposedly managed to maintain a surprisingly high standard of cuisine for the emperor for a good part of the campaign, even roasting chickens over campfires. Seems utterly fantastical now, looking at the grim faces around you. Your current culinary prospects involve frozen mud, probably. The daylight begins to fade, bringing an even deeper chill. Where will you stop? How will you stay warm? These questions, previously abstract worries, now feel intensely real and immediate. The confusion of the initial escape gives way to a dawning, chilling understanding. This is not a temporary hardship. This is the start of something long, something terrible, something that will grind you down piece by piece. And you've just taken your first few frozen steps into it, your boots crunching on the increasingly hard ground, following a path you didn't choose, heading towards a home that feels impossibly far away. As the last vestiges of gray light drain from the sky, the desperate, unspoken question hangs in the air. Where exactly are you supposed to be tonight? The endless column begins to fray at the edges, soldiers peeling off, looking for any slight depression in the ground, any stand of sparse trees, anything that offers the faintest hope of shelter from the wind and the rapidly intensifying cold. It's a chaotic, every man for himself sort of settling down. You see officers trying to maintain some semblance of order, pointing towards patches of woods or fields, but their voices are thin against the growing roar of the wind and the general exhaustion. You follow the flow, or maybe just your own weary feet, towards a small copse of birch trees that looks slightly less exposed than the open field. Finding a spot is a whole new struggle. Everyone has the same idea. The ground is already packed with shuffling figures, all vying for the same meager protection. You jostle for space, stepping over discarded equipment, tripping over frozen ruts. Eventually you find a small, relatively flat patch near the edge of the woods. It's not ideal, exposed to the wind from one side, but it's yours for now. You sink down, pulling your gray coat tighter, the cold immediately trying to leach the warmth from your body. The next priority is fire. Fires are life out here, the only defense against the creeping numbness. But finding fuel is surprisingly difficult. The nearby trees are small and scattered, and what branches are available are often damp or frozen. Men hack desperately at limbs with bayonets or small axes, if they're lucky enough to still have them. Others scrabble through the thin layer of snow and frozen leaves, searching for anything that will burn. You join in the effort, your fingers quickly growing stiff and clumsy. It's amazing how quickly basic tasks become monumental struggles when you're this cold. Trying to break a twig feels like trying to snap a steel rod. Small fires begin to spring up here and there, beacons of flickering light in the rapidly deepening gloom. You huddle close to one that a few other soldiers have managed to start, gratefully holding your numb hands towards the weak flames. The heat is a physical comfort, but it doesn't penetrate deep into your chilled core. The smoke stings your eyes and carries the acrid smell of damp wood and burning refuse. People throwing anything they can find onto the flames, old papers, leather scraps, even parts of broken wagons. It's not exactly a cozy campfire vibe. It's more like a desperation bonfire. Sleeping feels impossible. The ground is hard and cold. The wind whips around you, carrying fine ice crystals that sting your face. Every time you drift off, a sudden gust of wind or the cracking of a branch brings you jolting awake. You try curling into a ball, tucking your arms inside your coat, but the cold finds its way in regardless. You shift positions constantly, trying to find a less uncomfortable angle, a spot where the wind doesn't bite quite so hard. It's a restless, miserable vigil, punctuated by the coughs and groans of the men around you. The collective sound of suffering is almost louder than the wind sometimes. Food is a fading memory for most. If you were smart, you saved a scrap of that hard biscuit. If you weren't, you're now contemplating eating your leather belt. Pro tip: leather isn't very nutritious, and it's hell on your teeth. Ask me how I know. Actually, don't. You see some men trying to cook whatever scraps of meat they might have, holding it over the fire on a stick. But the flames are weak and the process is slow. The smell of cooking food, no matter how meager, is almost unbearable if you have nothing. It highlights just how precarious your situation is. One mainstream historical fact about this early stage of the retreat is that the sheer number of non-combatants and wagons accompanying the army significantly slowed their progress from the outset, contributing to the logistical nightmare that unfolded even before the worst of the winter hit. It was like trying to evacuate a small city with a military convoy, but with less planning and definitely no catering. As the night wears on, the temperatures continue to plummet. You feel the dampness from the ground seeping through your inadequate clothing. Your feet, especially, feel like blocks of ice. You wriggle your toes inside your boots, trying to maintain some circulation, but it feels like a futile effort. You glance around at the other figures huddled by the dying fires. Some are motionless, wrapped tight in their coats. Are they asleep or something else? You try not to dwell on it. You have to focus on yourself, on just getting through the next hour, the next minute. A quirky tidbit you might observe is the almost universal struggle with foot protection. Soldiers wore leather boots, fine for marching in good weather, but utterly useless against the deep cold and damp. Many resorted to wrapping their feet in rags, straw, or even strips of fabric torn from looted items or discarded uniforms in a desperate attempt to create some sort of insulation. You might even see someone with their feet wrapped in what looks suspiciously like a piece of someone's fancy curtains. Whatever works, right? Or, well, whatever doesn't quite not work anyway. There's a constant low murmur of discontent, punctuated by bursts of frustration or despair. Some men talk about home, about their families, about what they'll do when they get back. Others just curse the emperor, the Russians, the cold, their own poor life choices that led them to this frozen field. You listen or half listen, your own thoughts a jumble of discomfort and the single overriding desire for morning. You just need the sun to rise to bring some warmth, some hope. Historians still argue whether the decision to initially retreat via the same route they advanced upon, the route already stripped bare of supplies by the advance, was a fatal error or a calculated risk based on the presence of known tracks. Looking around at the barren, freezing landscape tonight, it feels less like a calculated risk and more like a really, really bad idea that's now actively trying to kill you. The fires die down to glowing embers, then to nothing. Darkness is absolute now, save for the faint starlight if the clouds break. The wind seems to howl louder, finding every exposed inch of skin. You shiver uncontrollably, your teeth chattering. You try burying your face in your hands, breathing into your cupped palms, anything to capture a little bit of warmth. Sleep is no longer a possibility, just a faint, cruel dream. You are awake, cold, and utterly miserable. This is the reality of the retreat, not the orderly, strategic withdrawal described in dispatches, but a slow, agonizing surrender to the elements, starting right here, on this first, endless night in the snow. Slowly, painfully, the absolute blackness begins to thin. It doesn't feel like dawn arriving with a gentle caress, more like a grudging, miserable leakage of weak, gray light into the world. You crack an eye open, instantly regretting it as the biting wind makes it water. Every muscle screams in protest as you try to shift, frozen stiff in whatever contorted position you spent the night in. The cold hasn't lessened. If anything, it feels deeper now, having had hours to work its way into your very bones. As more light seeps in, the scene around you sharpens into a horrifyingly clear picture. The small copse of birches looks less like shelter and more like a collection of skeletal fingers clawing at the pale sky. Everything is coated in a thin layer of frost and snow, making the ground look like a vast, uneven sheet of ice. The dying embers of the fires look pathetic, little smudges of black and gray against the white. The men who huddled around the fires, or simply collapsed in the field, are now revealed in their true state. Many are slowly, stiffly starting to move, pushing themselves up with groans and winces, looking like figures animated by some terrible, slow-motion clockwork. But many others are not moving at all. They lie where they fell, some curled tight, others sprawled awkwardly. Their greatcoats, stiff with frost, seem to hold them rigidly in place. It's a silent, grim census of the night's casualties. You try not to look directly at them, focusing instead on the immediate, pressing need to just stand up. Getting vertical is a monumental task. Your legs feel like they belong to someone else, wooden and unresponsive. You push down with numb hands, feeling the crunch of frozen earth and ice beneath your palms. Eventually, with a grunt of effort, you manage to get to your knees, then slowly, shakily, to your feet. You stand there for a moment, swaying slightly, trying to regain some sense of balance. The single boot feels like a lead weight, heavy and unforgiving. You can already feel the familiar ache starting in your knee and hip from the uneven gait. Ah, the joys of improvised footwear. It's less walking home and more very slowly listing towards home, probably backwards. The air stings in your lungs as you try to take a deep breath. It's thin and sharp. You look around at the chaos of the bivouac site. It's a scene of utter disarray. Discarded equipment litters the ground. Muskets, knapsacks, shakos, cooking pots, even musical instruments left behind by regimental bands. It's a material graveyard, abandoned in the desperate, singular pursuit of staying alive and moving forward. You see men hacking at the ice on their air water bottles, trying to get a single drop of water, or rummaging through the frozen packs in a last-ditch search for food. The scale of the Army's dissolution becomes horribly clear in the morning light. What started as a cohesive, albeit weary column yesterday evening has fractured into thousands of small, desperate groups and isolated individuals. The officers are still trying to rally men, blowing frozen trumpets or shouting hoarsely, but their authority feels thin here, replaced by the raw, brutal authority of the cold and hunger. There's no grand army anymore, just a collection of freezing, starving people trying to survive. One mainstream historical fact that this dawn reveals is the devastating loss of horses. The extreme cold, coupled with lack of fodder, meant that thousands of cavalry mounts and draft horses perished overnight. This crippled the Army's ability to transport supplies, artillery, and even the wounded, turning a difficult retreat into a near impossible flight for many. Seeing the frozen carcasses of horses dotted across the landscape adds another layer of grim reality to the morning. It's not just men succumbing. The very engine of the Army is dying. You rub your hands together trying to generate some friction, some warmth. Your fingers are clumsy and unresponsive. You should try to find something to eat, or at least something to make a fire with, but the sheer effort required feels overwhelming. It's easier, for a moment, to just stand there, shivering, and let the scale of the disaster wash over you. It's not exactly the morning routine they taught you in basic training. All right, recruits, drop and give me 20. Then try not to freeze to death in a field of corpses. Dismissed. A quirky tidbit you might notice, perhaps a detail that stands out amidst the general misery, is the peculiar state of grooming, or lack thereof. Beards and mustaches are often stiff with frozen condensation from breath. Some men have ice crystals clinging to their eyelashes. Personal appearance has ceased to be a concern, replaced by the singular goal of preventing frostbite and hypothermia. You might even see someone trying to chip away at a frozen snot cycle hanging from their nose. Survival is not glamorous. It's mostly just cold and inconveniently sticky. There's a general sense of inertia mixed with a growing, desperate need to move. Staying here means certain death as the meager shelter is abandoned and the ground remains frozen. But moving means facing the endless, unknown road ahead with no supplies and diminishing strength. The choice is stark and not really a choice at all. You have to keep walking. The question is, where? Historians still argue whether Napoleon himself fully grasped the speed and severity with which the Russian winter would decimate his army's capacity to function. Looking at the scene this morning, it's hard to imagine anyone truly comprehending this level of suffering and breakdown beforehand. Maybe he thought everyone just needed a really heavy coat and a positive attitude. You see small groups of men starting to coalesce, drawn together by shared language, shared regiment, or just shared desperation. There's safety, or at least the illusion of it, in numbers. You watch them, contemplating whether to join one, or if you're better off trying to find your own way. The idea of relying on anyone else right now feels risky. Everyone is a potential competitor for resources, however scarce they are. But the thought of being completely alone is even more terrifying. You take a tentative step forward, testing your stiff legs. The ice crunches under your boot. The other foot, wrapped in layers of damp rags, feels like a lump of wood. Yeah, this is going to be fun. A real walk in the frozen, corpse-strewn park. Maybe you'll see some rare migratory icebergs, or maybe just more frozen comrades. Probably the latter. The wind picks up again, carrying fine snow particles that sting your face. The weak morning light offers no warmth, only illumination for the scale of the disaster. It's a morning that kills hope as efficiently as the night killed bodies. But you are alive. You are standing. And that means for now, you have to keep moving. The column, or what's left of it, is beginning to stir, pulling itself together with painful slowness. Time to join the shuffling, shivering procession. The air is a blade against your exposed skin as you finally shuffle forward. Your legs, though stiff, remember the basic motion, a clumsy 1-2 facilitated by the unequal weight and stability of your footwear. The single boot is an anchor, heavy and secure, while the foot wrapped in rags slides a little on the packed snow and ice, offering less grip, more precarious balance. Each step is a conscious effort, a negotiation with the frozen ground and your own protesting muscles. This isn't marching, it's a survival shuffle, a collective lurch towards some unknown, hopefully less cold future. You join the ragged stream of humanity slowly pulling itself out of the frozen bivouac site. It's less a column and more a sprawling, disorganized mass. Men are walking alone in pairs in small clumps of 3 or 4. There's a general, unspoken direction, roughly west, back the way you came towards the setting sun, eventual, and away from the desolation of Russia. But there's no marching order, no standard pace. Each man, each group, is moving at the speed their exhaustion, injuries, and desperation dictate. It's the survival of the slightly less broken. The sounds are muted by the snow and the wind, but they are still present. The endless, monotonous crunch of thousands of feet on frozen snow, the occasional cough or groan, the flap of tattered clothing in the wind, the distant hoarse shouts of officers trying, often futilely, to impose some semblance of order. It's an acoustic landscape of misery, lacking any of the martial sounds you might associate with the marching army. No drums, no bugles playing cadence, just the grim symphony of suffering. Looking around, the state of the men is shocking, even after seeing them collapse last night. Faces are gaunt and gray, eyes sunken. Many are wrapped in whatever they could find. Blankets pilfered from houses, scraps of fabric, even hay tied around their feet or legs for warmth. Their uniforms, once symbols of the Grande Armée's might, are now just frozen, torn rags offering little protection. You see men hobbling on makeshift crutches, others with bandages wrapped around frostbitten hands or faces. Every single person around you is a walking testament to the brutal efficiency of the Russian winter as a weapon. The ground is littered not just with abandoned equipment, but with the bodies of those who didn't make it through the night. They lie twisted and stiff, sometimes partially covered by drifting snow. You have to step carefully to avoid them, a grim obstacle course that reinforces the precariousness of your own position. It's a constant visual reminder of the stakes. One wrong step, one moment of weakness, and you could easily join them. Sleep, it turns out, can be a surprisingly effective killer when it's cold enough. Who knew? It's like the ultimate do not disturb sign. As you trudge along, the sun, now fully risen but still offering no warmth, glints off the frozen landscape. The snow stretches out in vast, unbroken plains, punctuated only by the dark shapes of distant woods or the occasional ruined village. There are no landmarks you recognize, no signs pointing the way. It's just endless white under a pale sky. You're walking home, theoretically, but the concept feels abstract, distant, possibly mythical. Right now, home is just not here, hopefully slightly warmer and with food. One mainstream historical fact that defines this stage of the retreat is the breakdown of supply lines. The army had left Moscow with limited provisions, expecting to forage or find supplies along the route. But the rapid onset of winter, the scorched earth tactics of the Russians, and the death of the horses meant that organized resupply was impossible. What little food remained was quickly consumed or fell into enemy hands. This forced the soldiers to live off whatever they could steal or find, which in the frozen landscape was practically nothing, leading to widespread starvation that weakened them and made them even more vulnerable to the cold. You see men scavenging desperately, digging through the snow with their hands, hoping to find a discarded crust of bread or a frozen potato. The competition for resources is fierce, though often silent. There's no energy for arguments, just a grim, focused scramble for survival. You keep your gaze fixed forward, trying not to attract attention, conserving your own dwindling energy. A quirky tidbit you might observe is the presence of various non-military personnel mixed into the column. Sutlers, camp followers, wives and girlfriends of officers, even some civilians who had lived in Moscow and tried to flee with the army. They are all caught up in this same desperate retreat. Their presence highlights the chaotic collapse of the campaign, showing how the line between combatant and civilian blurred completely in the face of utter disaster. You might see a woman in elaborate but ruined clothes struggling through the snow, or a merchant trying to push a broken cart laden with worthless goods. There's an open scholarly debate about the precise percentage of the Grande Armée that was non-combatant personnel, and how their inclusion impacted the logistics and speed of the retreat. Some historians argue they were a significant drain on resources and slowed the column, while others contend their numbers, while substantial, weren't the primary factor in the logistical collapse compared to things like horse mortality and the weather. You take another step, the rags on your left foot scrunching awkwardly. It's already damp inside, the snow working its way through the layers. The cold is seeping in, numbing your toes. You wiggle them inside the improvised covering, trying to keep the blood flowing. It's a small, futile gesture, but it feels like doing something. You tell yourself it's fine, you'll just walk fast enough to generate warmth. It's not working. This is less like walking and more like dragging two increasingly numb appendages through a frozen Slurpee machine. The column, if you can call it that, stretches out ahead and behind, a dark, broken line against the white. There's no talk of victory, no patriotic songs, just the shared, silent understanding of the immediate goal. Put one foot in front of the other. Don't stop. Keep moving. The wind continues to bite, whipping around you, carrying the scent of ice and misery. You pull your collar tighter, tucking your chin down, trying to create a small pocket of slightly warmer air to breathe. Every small comfort is a victory. You see a group ahead, stopping briefly, huddled together. Are they resting? Or are they just stopping? The thought sends a shiver down your spine that has nothing to do with the cold. You don't want to stop. Stopping feels like giving up. You force yourself to pick up the pace slightly, pushing past a few slower individuals, merging with a small knot of soldiers who look like they at least know each other. Being alone feels too exposed out here. The sun is a cold, indifferent eye in the sky. The landscape is beautiful in a terrible, desolate way. Vast, pure white, stark against the pale blue sky. If you weren't freezing, starving, and fearing for your life, it might even be peaceful. But you are, and it's not. It's just beautiful, endless, deadly cold, and you have a long, long way to walk, or shuffle, or list, whatever it is you're doing. The shuffle continues, the rhythm now ingrained in your weary muscles. But a new persistent ache is starting to dominate everything else. It's not just the cold or the stiffness. It's a hollow, gnawing sensation deep in your gut. Hunger. It's been a constant companion since leaving Moscow. A dull hum that's now intensifying into a demanding roar. Every step you take seems to consume energy you simply don't have, burning reserves that are long gone. Your body is staging a quiet, desperate protest, reminding you that warmth and rest aren't the only things you're critically short on. Walking while truly hungry is a different kind of torture. Your vision occasionally tunnels, the world narrowing to the few feet of snow in front of you. You feel lightheaded, sometimes dizzy. The cold seems to bite deeper because there's no internal furnace of metabolism burning brightly. Your body is conserving every calorie, every ounce of heat, just trying to keep the lights on, so to speak. It's like trying to run a marathon on fumes with the added bonus of freezing temperatures. The landscape, still vast and indifferent, starts to look different through the lens of the starvation. Your eyes scan the ground, not just for obstacles, but for anything that might be edible. A frozen crust discarded by someone slightly luckier, a patch of ground where something might have grown before the snow fell, even tracks that might lead to a stray animal, though animals are long gone from this path of destruction. Your mind, usually focused on the immediate task of survival, finds itself drifting into vivid, agonizing memories of food. A warm loaf of bread, a hearty stew, even just a simple piece of cheese. Those memories are a form of cruelty, a tease your starving brain plays on you. You see others doing the same, their gaunt faces perpetually scanning the ground. There's a quiet competition for anything found. A sudden scramble erupts 100 yards ahead. A small group has found something, perhaps a dead horse or a discarded ration pack. There's a brief, brutal flurry of activity, quickly over, and they disperse, each clutching their meager prize or empty-handed. It's a chilling demonstration of how quickly civility evaporates when primal needs take over. It makes you want to shrink into yourself, hoping you don't stumble upon anything valuable enough to make you a target. The mainstream historical fact here is that starvation became an equal, if not greater, killer than the cold or Russian attacks during large parts of the retreat. The reliance on foraging, combined with the devastated landscape and the sheer size of the army and its followers, meant that widespread famine was inevitable. Men ate anything they could find, horseflesh, often raw, dogs, cats, birds, bark, leaves dug from under the snow, even resorting to cannibalism in the most extreme circumstances. The organized army structure dissolved partly because finding food became the single overriding priority for individuals and small groups. You keep your eyes down, trying to ignore the hunger pangs, trying to conserve energy by not thinking about food. But it's hard. Your stomach feels like a deflated balloon rubbing against itself. You think about the moss-bred rations from the way in, wishing you had just one crumb left. Even that awful stuff would be a feast right now. It's funny how quickly your standards drop when your body is screaming for calories. Suddenly, that mystery meat from the barracks feels like gourmet dining. A quirky tidbit from the retreat is that some soldiers, desperate for sustenance, reportedly tried to eat tallow from candles or grease from wagon wheels. While likely providing minimal nutritional value and potentially causing digestive issues, these desperate acts illustrate the sheer extremity of the famine. Imagine being so hungry that rendered animal fat from a candle seems like a viable meal option. It's a stark reminder that human ingenuity, when faced with starvation, can lead to trying almost anything, regardless of how unappetizing or ineffective it might be. You see a soldier ahead gnawing on something white and hard. You can't tell what it is and you don't ask. Ignorance feels safer than knowing. Your own jaw aches slightly in sympathy, or maybe just from the involuntary clenching brought on by hunger. You swallow hard, trying to moisten your dry mouth. Dehydration is another issue. Finding clean water that isn't frozen solid is incredibly difficult, and melting snow takes time and fuel, both precious commodities. There's an open scholarly debate about whether the French command structure could have done more to mitigate the effects of starvation, or if the scale of the disaster and the conditions made it inevitable, regardless of leadership decisions. Some historians argue that better logistical planning or a different retreat route might have saved more lives, while others maintain that the Russian winter and the scorched earth tactics were insurmountable obstacles that doomed the army to famine no matter what. You feel a slight incline in the path ahead. Each step uphill is agony, your legs trembling with the effort. The single boot is heavy, dragging you back slightly, while your rag-wrapped foot slides on a patch of ice, making you stumble. You catch yourself, heart pounding, adrenaline giving you a brief, unwelcome jolt of energy. You can't afford to fall. Falling could mean being left behind, and being left behind means almost certain death. It's a simple, brutal calculus. You try to distract yourself from the hunger by focusing on the physical sensations of walking. The scrape of the rags on snow, the dull thud of the boot, the sound of your own ragged breathing. It helps a little, but the hunger is a persistent background noise that you can't tune out. It's like having a really annoying jingle stuck in your head, except the jingle is your body screaming for food. You see a group of men huddled around a small, smoldering fire near the path. They look like they've managed to scrounge up some wood. The smell of smoke is strong, and for a second, you think you catch a whiff of something else, something cooking. Your stomach clenches violently. You want to approach, to see what they might have, to beg for a scrap. But something holds you back. Fear of rejection, fear of violence, or maybe just the sheer, overwhelming inertia of putting one foot in front of the other. You keep walking, forcing your gaze forward, away from the tantalizing, dangerous warmth. The wind picks up again, carrying fine particles of snow that sting your exposed cheeks. You pull the remnants of your coat tighter. The cold and the hunger are working in tandem, a terrible double act designed to break you down. One saps your body heat, the other consumes your internal resources. They are the perfect predatory duo, stalking the stragglers of the Grande Armée across this frozen wasteland. You focus on the back of the man in front of you, an anonymous figure wrapped in gray rags. He's just slightly faster than you, a good pace to try and match. You fix your eyes on him, making him your temporary goal. Just reach that guy, then reach the next guy. Break it down into tiny, manageable steps. Don't think about home, don't think about food, don't think about the distance. Just put one foot in front of the other, and try not to stare too long at anyone who looks like they might have found something to eat. The endless snowscape gradually gives way to a subtle change in the terrain. The flat, featureless white is broken by undulations, shallow ravines, the hint of a larger geographical feature ahead. Whispers start moving through the ragged line of walkers, hushed and fearful, passed from one gaunt face to the next. The Berezina. The name hangs in the air like a death sentence. You can't see the river yet, but the growing density of the crowd ahead, the piles of abandoned wagons and equipment littering the snowy banks, tell you that the great obstacle is near. This isn't just another stream to navigate. This is the river, the one everyone has dreaded since the retreat began. Your stomach clenches again, not just from hunger this time, but from a cold, heavy dread. You've heard the stories, seen the men who look like they've already been pulled from an icy grave. Crossing a frozen river is terrifying enough, but crossing this river, with thousands of desperate, panicked souls vying for a single path, perhaps on makeshift bridges that might not hold, it feels less like a survival challenge and more like an appointment with destiny. And destiny looks like it brought a large, cold, wet hammer. As you draw closer, the scene unfolds in horrifying detail. The river is partially frozen, vast and gray, the ice patchy and unstable near the banks. Further out, fast-flowing water swirls ominously, and spanning the treacherous current are bridges, not sturdy stone structures, but hastily constructed affairs of logs and planks, incredibly narrow, packed shoulder to shoulder with a slow-moving, terrified mass of humanity. The air is filled with a terrifying symphony, the groans of the wood under immense weight, the crack of ice, the chilling sound of screams, and the constant low roar of the river itself. It's chaos given form, a maelstrom of desperation. The fear is palpable, a thick fog that hangs over the riverbanks. You see men hesitate at the approach to the bridges, their eyes wide with terror. Others push forward relentlessly, driven by a desperate need to get to the other side. Any side that isn't this one. Abandoned cannons, wagons loaded with loot or personal belongings, lie half submerged in the icy water, or sit forlornly on the banks, testaments to the brutal choices being made. Survival has stripped away sentiment, possessions, sometimes even humanity. The mainstream historical fact is that the crossing of the Berezina River in late November 1812 was one of the most catastrophic episodes of the entire retreat. While Napoleon and a core part of his army managed to cross thanks to bridges built by dedicated engineers, many thousands of stragglers, camp followers, women, and children were left behind or perished attempting to cross the unstable bridges under relentless Russian artillery fire. The loss of life was horrific, cementing the Berezina's place in history as a symbol of the retreat's devastation. You inch forward with the crowd, the pressure from behind making it impossible to stop. Your single boot sinks into the muddy, slushy snow near the bank, making it heavier. Your rag-wrapped foot is numb, but you can feel the biting cold through the layers. The water looks impossibly cold, a churning dark gray under the weak winter light. Getting wet here means hypothermia within minutes. Falling in means almost certain death. It's not exactly the scenic river cruise you might have imagined for your retirement. A quirky tidbit related to the Berezina crossing involves the remarkable and heroic efforts of the engineers, primarily Dutch pontonniers, who built the two essential bridges under constant fire and in freezing conditions. Led by General Jean-Baptiste Blay, these men worked waist-deep in the icy water, sometimes for hours on end, assembling the pontoons and timber structures. Many of them died from hypothermia or exhaustion during or shortly after the crossing, having sacrificed themselves to save the army. It's a stark contrast to the panic and every man for himself attitude seen among many others, a tiny beacon of duty and incredible resilience in the face of overwhelming horror. You watch the bridge ahead. It sways slightly under the weight. There are gaps between the planks, allowing glimpses of the churning water below. Every few minutes a shout goes up, someone stumbles, disappears into the mass, or worse, goes over the side. The flow of people is less a line and more a viscous, agonizingly slow-moving blob. You try to find a spot that looks slightly less crowded, but there isn't one. It's wall-to-wall desperation. There's an open scholarly debate about whether Napoleon's decision to delay the crossing, perhaps hoping for the river to freeze solid, or his subsequent actions during the crossing, exacerbated the disaster for the rear guard and the stragglers. Some historians argue that the timing and execution of the crossing were flawed, leading to unnecessary losses, while others contend that the army was already in such a dire state and the Russian pressure so immense that the Berezina catastrophe was largely unavoidable regardless of command decisions. Your turn to step onto the bridge approaches. Your heart is pounding in your chest. Your hands, stiff with cold, instinctively reach out to grasp at the shoulders of the people in front and beside you for balance. But they are doing the same, clinging to anyone near them. The wooden planks feel slick under your boot. The rags on your other foot offer little grip. You are acutely aware of the thousands of pounds of weight pressing down on this fragile structure, and the deep cold water just inches below. You take a shallow breath, the frigid air burning your lungs. Each step onto the bridge feels like a commitment you might not be able to see through. The noise intensifies, the creaking wood, the frantic cries, the wind whipping across the river, carrying sleet that stings your exposed skin. You keep your eyes fixed on the back of the person in front of you, trying not to look down at the terrifying gaps or the icy water. Just one step, then another. Slow, agonizing progress. You are a single molecule in a river of suffering flowing across a bridge built of courage and desperation. The pressure from behind is immense, pushing you forward whether you want to go or not. You feel a brief surge of panic. What if the bridge breaks? Now, what if you slip? There's no turning back. The crowd is a living entity, moving with terrifying momentum. It's less about your own will and more about being carried along by the collective current of dread and forward motion. You focus on keeping your footing, maintaining balance, praying with every silent step that the timbers hold, that the ice stays firm beneath the pontoons, that you don't become another statistic swallowed by the gray, indifferent Berezina. You've survived cold, hunger, exhaustion, attacks. But crossing this feels like the ultimate gamble. You stumble forward, propelled by the relentless surge of bodies behind you, and then suddenly you're off the creaking, groaning timber and onto solid ground. Or what passes for solid ground here? A churned-up mix of snow, ice, mud, and the grim detritus of a fleeing army. There's a collective, ragged exhale around you. A momentary pause as people realize they've made it across that. But the relief is instantly swallowed by the sheer, overwhelming reality of the other bank. It's not a safe haven, it's just more. More crowds, somehow even denser than before. More abandoned wagons, some tipped over, contents spilled into the muck. More men huddled around pathetic, dying fires, faces blackened with smoke and despair. More bodies, some frozen in grotesque poses, others still twitching faintly. The sound isn't just the wind and the river anymore. It's a low hum of exhaustion, punctuated by coughs, groans, and the occasional sharp cry. You've crossed the river, the seemingly impossible barrier, only to find yourself in a landscape that still screams survival, just with slightly wetter boots. Your single boot squishes slightly as you step, reminding you of the icy water that lapped at the bank. The rags on your other foot are soaked, clinging like frozen bandages. That foot is completely numb now, a dead weight you drag behind you. You instinctively look back at the bridges, the terrifying arteries still pulsing with the frantic flow of humanity. Russian shells occasionally land nearby, sending plumes of snow and debris into the air. A constant, grim reminder that the danger hasn't magically vanished just because you changed banks. It's like finally finishing that last mile of a marathon, only to be told you have another marathon starting right now uphill in a blizzard. You need to find shelter, warmth, anything. But the crowd is moving again, a slow, shuffling tide heading west. There's no stopping here. To stop is to invite the cold to claim you, or to be left behind by the main body, such as it is. You fall into step, another anonymous figure in the long, ragged line. The urgency isn't the panicked rush of the bridge anymore, but a deep, ingrained need to keep moving, to put distance between you and that river, between you and the pursuing Cossacks whose distant shouts sometimes echo across the white plains. The march continues, a slow, grinding effort. The terrain on this bank is similar to the other, though perhaps a bit more rolling, with frozen streams and wooded areas that offer brief, tantalizing promises of firewood or cover, promises that are rarely fulfilled. The cold is a constant, gnawing pain. Your lungs burn with every breath. You hug yourself, trying to conserve what little body heat you have. Your stomach aches with a hollow, desperate hunger. Remember that moss-bread ration from days ago? It feels like a feast now. Your imagination serves up lavish banquets. Roast chicken, warm bread, hot soup, cruel hallucinations in this frozen wasteland. A mainstream historical fact is that after the harrowing crossing of the Berezina, the remnants of the Grande Armée faced the prospect of another grueling march of several hundred kilometers through increasingly harsh conditions towards Vilna, modern-day Vilnius, Lithuania. This leg of the journey was particularly brutal due to the combination of extreme cold, lack of supplies, relentless Russian pursuit, and the general physical and psychological breakdown of the troops. Many thousands more perished on the road between the Berezina and Vilna than during the crossing itself. The river was a choke point, but the road beyond was a slow, drawn-out death sentence for countless individuals. As you trudge along, you notice small groups peeling off from the main path, heading towards the sparse woods, probably hoping to find some meager shelter or forage. You consider it for a moment. The thought of getting out of the wind, finding a tree to huddle under, is incredibly tempting. But the fear of getting lost, of being completely alone, of being caught by the Russians without the minimal protection of the crowd, keeps you on the main, trampled track. Better the known misery of the road than the terrifying unknown of isolation. It's a classic trolley problem, except the trolley is hypothermia and the two tracks both lead to varying degrees of awful. A quirky tidbit from this phase of the retreat involves the behavior of some soldiers who, despite their dire circumstances, still clung to the symbols of their former lives or status. Accounts describe officers attempting to maintain appearances, wearing tattered remnants of their fine uniforms, or individuals dragging bizarre, useless items they had looted earlier in the campaign. Candelabras, tapestries, elaborate clocks, utterly useless in a snow-swept forest, yet carried with a strange, desperate pride or delusion. It's a poignant, if slightly absurd, illustration of how hard it is for the human mind to let go of normalcy, even when normalcy has ceased to exist. You certainly don't see anyone trying to lug a grandfather clock now, though. They learned that lesson the hard way, probably back near the Dvina. There's an open scholarly debate about the exact number of soldiers and followers who successfully crossed the Berezina compared to those who perished or were left behind. Estimates vary wildly, complicated by the chaotic nature of the crossing, the difficulty in distinguishing soldiers from civilians or camp followers, and the rapid disintegration of units. Some historians rely on official reports and witness accounts to arrive at figures, while others argue that the true scale of the disaster, particularly for the non-combatants, may be significantly underestimated, making it difficult to pin down a definitive casualty count for this pivotal event. The cold bites harder as the weak daylight begins to fade. The snow takes on a blue, ethereal glow. The wind picks up, swirling the loose snow around your feet, stinging your face. You pull the thin rags tighter around your head, trying to protect your ears. Your shoulders ache, your legs burn, and your numb foot feels like a block of ice. You shuffle forward, focusing on the rhythm of the footsteps ahead of you, a hypnotic, monotonous sound. Right foot, left foot, or rather, right foot, drag ragged foot. Repeat, forever. You spot a glint in the snow off to the side. Someone has dropped something. Your heart gives a tiny, pathetic flicker of hope. Could it be food? A valuable item you could trade? You break from the line for a moment, fighting against the inertia of the crowd. You reach the spot, bending stiffly. It's a small, tarnished silver locket. Empty. Worthless in your current situation. You toss it back into the snow. What you need is calories, not trinkets. It's a brief, harsh reminder that sentimentality is a luxury you cannot afford. Survival is purely transactional. Calories in, energy out, warmth maintained. Everything else is just extra baggage, and you are absolutely swimming in extra baggage. As darkness falls, the cold becomes truly terrifying. The temperature plummets, each gust of wind feeling like a physical blow. You see men stumble and fall, and fewer are helped back up. It's not cruelty, it's just sheer, desperate exhaustion and the overwhelming instinct for self-preservation. To stop and help is to risk your own life. You keep moving, a silent prayer forming in your mind. Just make it to the next day. Just make it through the night. The Berezina may be behind you, but the cold, vast, indifferent landscape is still your enemy, and it has a seemingly endless supply of ammunition. The night deepens around you, thick and oppressive. The moon, if there is one behind the perpetually overcast sky, offers no light. The only illumination comes from the occasional weak glint on the snow, or the flickering remnants of small, desperate fires huddled off the main path. You can hear the low murmur of voices, the crunch of snow under hundreds of feet, and the hacking coughs that echo in the frigid air. Your numb foot feels less like a foot and more like a heavy wooden club you're dragging along. The rags are frozen stiff, rubbing painfully against your skin, or what you imagine is still skin underneath the numbness. You try stamping your good foot occasionally, swinging your arms, anything to generate a little warmth. It barely makes a difference. The cold seems to seep into your very bones, a constant internal shiver that you can't shake. Your breath condenses into icy fog in front of your face. Your nose runs constantly, and you have to wipe it on your sleeve, which is also frozen stiff and about as absorbent as a plank of wood. It's like trying to survive inside a giant freezer that someone occasionally opens to blast you with an Arctic fan. Food is a distant memory. The hunger pangs have mostly subsided, replaced by a dull, aching emptiness. This you've learned is actually worse in some ways. It means your body has largely given up on demanding fuel and is just trying to conserve what little energy it has left. You see others doing the same, moving mechanically, eyes fixed on the snow ahead, conserving every ounce of energy for forward motion. The shared misery is a grim kind of camaraderie, a silent acknowledgement that everyone here is just one bad step or one deep breath of cold air away from joining the frozen figures in the snow. You pass more discarded items, broken muskets, tattered knapsacks, even a forgotten drum lying half buried. These aren't just things, they represent lost hope, the final surrender of burdens that became too heavy to bear. No one stops to pick them up. There's nothing here anyone needs except warmth, food, and shelter, and the land offers none willingly. It's a minimalist dream, perhaps, if the minimalist was also a masochist with a death wish. A mainstream historical fact is that the period immediately following the Berezina crossing, during the retreat towards Vilna in December 1812, was characterized by an exponential increase in non-combat casualties due to exposure, starvation, and disease. While battles were fought and soldiers continued to skirmish with the pursuing Russians and Cossacks, the primary enemy for the Grande Armée remnants became the brutal Russian winter itself, coupled with the complete collapse of the supply chain. The conditions were so extreme that frostbite and hypothermia claimed thousands daily, turning the march into a death march on an unprecedented scale. Your single boot slips occasionally on icy patches hidden under the fresh snow, sending a jolt up your leg. You catch yourself each time, the sudden effort draining. Falling isn't an option you can afford. If you fall, getting back up requires a monumental effort that many simply can't muster, and the crowd doesn't stop. You'd be trampled, or worse, left behind to freeze alone. The path ahead is a narrow tightrope of survival, and maintaining your balance, both physical and mental, is paramount. You try to think of something else, anything other than the cold and the hunger. You think of home, of a warm fire, of a simple meal. These thoughts are dangerous, though. They highlight the immense gap between your current reality and any semblance of comfort, making the present suffering even more acute. It's better, perhaps, to just focus on the shuffle, the next step, the next hour. Breaking it down into tiny, manageable increments is the only way to cope with the overwhelming scale of the disaster. Like tackling a massive essay, one sentence at a time, except the penalty for failing is slightly higher than a bad grade. A quirky tidbit from this part of the retreat describes how many soldiers developed an almost obsessive focus on obtaining even the most meager amounts of food. Accounts mention men risking their lives to scavenge frozen potatoes from abandoned fields, or desperate attempts to catch crows or other birds for sustenance. There are also grim tales of soldiers resorting to eating the carcasses of dead horses, sometimes even before the animal had fully succumbed to the cannon or exhaustion. This level of desperation highlights the extreme lack of provisions and the primal drive to survive when faced with starvation. You certainly eye any stray animal or bird with a completely different perspective now. There's an open scholarly debate regarding the extent to which Napoleon himself understood the full scale of the unfolding catastrophe during this phase of the retreat, particularly after leaving the main body of the army in early December to return to Paris. Some historians argue he was deliberately shielded from the worst news, or that his focus had already shifted to raising a new army, while others contend that even his strategic genius couldn't fully grasp the unprecedented human cost of the complete breakdown of order and supply in such extreme conditions, especially once he was no longer personally present to witness it daily. You pass a small group huddled off the path. One of them is trying to coax a spark from a tiny fire of twigs. Their faces, briefly illuminated by the weak glow, are gaunt and gray. They look up as you pass, eyes hollow and pleading. You shake your head slightly. You have nothing to share, not even encouragement. To join them would mean stopping, risking freezing solid for a few minutes of uncertain warmth. You keep walking. It's a harsh calculus of survival, where compassion is a luxury you can't afford to spend. Your body is starting to protest in new ways. Beyond the numbness in your foot, your fingers and toes ache with a deep, burning pain. The first stages of frostbite setting in, a grim counterpoint to the pervasive cold. You wiggle your fingers inside your thin gloves, trying to restore circulation. But it feels futile. You know the stories, fingers and toes turning black, falling off. It's just another potential outcome in this game of morbid roulette. At this point, keeping all your original equipment feels like a minor victory. The constant physical effort combined with lack of sleep and food makes your mind foggy. You sometimes hallucinate sounds, distant bugle calls, shouts that aren't there, the rumble of wagons that passed days ago. It's a strange, disorienting state, like being half asleep and half awake in a nightmare you can't escape. You have to constantly force yourself back to the present, to the icy reality of the snow beneath your one boot and the dragging rags on the other foot. The goal, you hear whispers of it passing through the line, is Vilna. Vilna is supposed to be a place of rest, supplies, safety. It's hundreds of kilometers away, maybe weeks of marching in these conditions. The thought is both a faint glimmer of hope and an almost insurmountable challenge. It feels like being told you have to swim across the Atlantic after just surviving a shipwreck. But hope, however fragile, is still something to cling to. You focus on Vilna, on the abstract concept of survival waiting somewhere over the horizon. You shuffle onward, part of the endless, sorrowful river of humanity flowing west. The cold bites, the hunger gnaws, the exhaustion is absolute. But you are still moving, one painful step after another. The river is behind you, but the wilderness ahead is just as deadly. A vast white canvas upon which thousands of stories of endurance and despair are being written with frozen fingers. The dragging continues. The rhythm is ingrained now. Slide, lift the good foot, shuffle, slide the other. Your body protests with every movement, a symphony of aches and pains that somehow manages to sound both excruciating and utterly boring at the same time. The rags on your non-booted foot are a constant, cold burden, catching on uneven ground, collecting ice, occasionally tearing just enough to give a fresh, albeit numb, scrape. You think of those little plastic bags you wrap around your feet when it rains, except yours is made of frozen misery and despair. The deep burning in your fingers and toes hasn't subsided. It's intensified. They feel like they're encased in solid ice, simultaneously numb and throbbing. You know intellectually that this isn't a good sign. These are the warning bells before the tissue damage becomes irreversible. You try wiggling them harder, flapping your hands like a penguin, anything to get some blood flow, but it feels like pushing water uphill with a sieve made of cobwebs. It's a losing battle, a slow descent into losing extremities, one frozen digit at a time. You wonder which toe will be the first to make a bid for freedom. The psychological toll is just as heavy, perhaps heavier than the physical one. The constant exposure to suffering and death numbs you. You pass bodies regularly now, frozen solid in poses of final agony or slumped resignation. They no longer shock you. They are just part of the landscape, grim milestones marking the path. You avoid looking too closely, not out of fear or respect, but because recognizing a face, imagining a story requires emotional energy you simply don't have. It's easier to just see them as lumps in the snow, like particularly unfortunate pieces of abstract art titled "Failure to Proceed." The crowd has thinned noticeably since the river, not just because of the dead, but because it's fractured. Large organized groups are rare. It's mostly individuals or small clusters of 2 or 3 strung out along the road, each fighting their own private war against the elements. The low murmur of voices has faded, replaced by the pervasive silence of the snow, broken only by the crunch of boots or rags, the occasional cough and the whisper of the wind. The air is still thick with the scent of wood smoke from distant, desperate fires, mixed with something acrid and unpleasant, the smell of unwashed bodies, decay, and frozen misery. A mainstream historical fact is that dysentery and typhus became rampant among the retreating forces during this phase, exacerbated by malnutrition, exhaustion, and appalling sanitary conditions. While the cold killed thousands outright, disease often finished off those weakened by the elements, contributing significantly to the devastating non-combat losses. The crowding and lack of basic hygiene in the impromptu bivouacs and temporary shelters created ideal breeding grounds for these deadly pathogens, turning the army's own numbers against itself. It wasn't just the cold, it was the entire package of horrific survival conditions. You find yourself focusing intensely on tiny details: the pattern of ice crystals on a branch, the way your breath hangs in the air, the exact texture of the snow under your dragging foot. It's a coping mechanism, a way to shrink the overwhelming reality down into manageable sensory inputs. The vastness of the snow, the endless march, the crushing despair, that's too much. But the tiny, intricate beauty of a snowflake, that you can handle, for a few seconds at least. It's like trying to survive a tsunami by contemplating a single drop of water. Hope is a fragile thing. The whispers of Vilna keep you moving, but the sheer distance, the constant drain of energy, makes it feel less like a destination and more like a cruel legend. You hear stories, rumors, contradictory reports. Some say supplies are waiting. Others say it's chaos there too. You don't know what to believe, so you try not to believe anything too strongly, positive or negative. It's safer to exist in a state of numb uncertainty, just putting 1.5 feet in front of the other. A quirky tidbit from accounts of the retreat mentions soldiers fashioning makeshift snow goggles or covering their eyes with rags against the blinding glare reflecting off the snow. Without protection, many suffered from snow blindness, adding yet another debilitating ailment to the list. Imagine stumbling through this frozen nightmare, and you can't even see where you're going properly. It's like being given a difficulty setting of expert, and then someone randomly hits the blindfold button halfway through. There's an open scholarly debate concerning the degree to which unit cohesion and military discipline completely dissolved during this final stage of the retreat. Some historians argue that pockets of discipline and unit identity persisted among veteran cadres and guard units almost to the end, while others contend that by December 18th, the vast majority of the Grand Army had devolved into a desperate, every man for himself struggle for survival, with rank and command holding little sway over exhausted and starving soldiers. You certainly see less saluting, that's for sure. Selfishness is no longer a vice, it's the price of admission. You see men push past others, refuse to share the slightest warmth from a fire, hoard meager scraps of food. You do it too instinctively. Your entire being is focused inward on the minimal energy required to keep moving. Any surplus, any thought for another, feels like a dangerous extravagance, like trying to offer someone a latte when you barely have enough water to lick the ice off your sleeve. Your body aches in places you didn't know you had. Your hips burn, your knees creak, your lower back feels like it's made of brittle glass. The constant, awkward shuffle of your one good foot compensating for the dragging one puts an unnatural strain on your entire frame. Sleep offers no real respite. The cold wakes you constantly, or the dull ache, or the need to stay close to the barely there warmth of others without getting too close. You pass a frozen horse, its ribs stark against its icy hide. For a second, the thought flickers. Meat. But it's frozen solid, harder than rock, and the effort required to even attempt to hack off a piece, it's just not worth it. The energy cost outweighs the potential reward. Another grim calculation made on the fly, where calories are the only currency that matters. At this point, you'd probably trade your non-booted foot for a warm pasty. The sky remains an indifferent, gray expanse. There's no sun, no stars, just endless gray stretching overhead. It matches the mood perfectly. Monochromatic, cold, and utterly devoid of cheer, like trying to find a silver lining in a cloud made of concrete and despair. You keep moving. The goal feels impossibly far, the present impossibly hard. But the alternative is worse. So you shuffle, you drag, you ache, you freeze, and you just keep putting one foot and one bundle of rags in front of the other. It's not living, it's just not dying yet. The edges of reality are starting to blur. It's not just exhaustion, it's something deeper, something that feels like the snow is seeping into your skull and freezing your thoughts. You see things out of the corner of your eye, figures that aren't there, familiar faces that disappear when you turn, fleeting glimpses of warmth or shelter that resolve into nothing but snowdrifts and empty air. Your mind, deprived of proper sleep, warmth, and sustenance, is staging its own private, deeply unhelpful light show. It's like watching abstract art projected onto the inside of a freezer. The sound of your own breathing seems too loud, sometimes distorted into whispers or rustling noises that make you look around nervously. You hear faint echoes of conversations, snippets of song, the distant clamor of camp that perhaps existed days ago or maybe never did. It's the brain trying to entertain itself, presumably, by playing a broken mixtape of your worst memories and deepest desires on repeat. Very thoughtful. Dreams intrude upon your waking hours. Not sleep dreams, but vivid, hallucinatory flashes. You might see a steaming bowl of soup just ahead, so real you can almost smell the broth, only for it to dissolve when you reach for it. Or a warm, dry barn, complete with hay bales and a friendly cat, beckoning you inside. It's a cruel trick, a mirage of comfort in a desert of ice. These aren't just passing thoughts. They feel present, overlaid onto the stark reality of endless white and biting cold. The physical and mental breakdown are intertwined. Dehydration, even in freezing temperatures, you're sweating under those layers, trust me, or should be. Malnutrition, constant stress, and of course the relentless cold, they all conspire to scramble your brain. It's a chemical cocktail designed specifically to make you question your sanity. You might find yourself having lengthy, one-sided conversations with inanimate objects, or arguing with yourself about the philosophical implications of frozen toes. A mainstream historical fact is that the severe conditions led to widespread psychological distress among the soldiers, including disorientation, hallucinations, and a complete breakdown of morale in many instances. The sheer scale of the suffering, combined with the loss of command structure and the constant threat of death by exposure, created an environment where sanity was a luxury few could afford. Men who had faced down cannons crumbled under the quiet, relentless siege of the cold and the mental strain. You sometimes feel a strange sense of detachment, as if you are watching yourself from a distance, this pathetic figure shuffling through the snow. It's a coping mechanism, perhaps, or maybe just another symptom of your mind checking out early. You observe your own actions, the mechanical lift and drag of your feet, the numb fumbling of your hands, the vacant stare, with a sort of detached curiosity. Look at him go, you might think, still trying. Bless his frozen idiot heart. There's an open scholarly debate regarding the specific psychological syndromes observed during the retreat. While terms like hypothermia-induced psychosis are used, historians and medical experts still debate whether the unique combination of extreme cold, starvation, and psychological trauma constituted a distinct form of breakdown, or if it was simply a complex manifestation of known conditions exacerbated by unprecedented circumstances. Basically, they argue if you were uniquely messed up by this specific nightmare, or just regular messed up on a really bad day. A quirky or fringe tidbit from various accounts mentions soldiers experiencing vivid auditory hallucinations, sometimes hearing familiar voices calling their names from the snowdrifts, or the sounds of cheering crowds from miles away. For some, these phantom sounds provided a strange, temporary comfort. For others, they were terrifying manifestations of madness in the desolate silence. It's like your internal radio station decided to switch to the spooky ghost sounds and misleading encouragement channel. Maintaining focus is a monumental task. Every thought drifts, every intention dissolves like smoke in the wind. You have to constantly drag your mind back to the present, back to the simple, critical goal. Keep moving. It's like trying to herd cats made of mist while walking on ice. You might start thinking about your childhood dog, then wonder if dogs feel the cold, then ponder the ethical implications of using animals in war, then suddenly realize you've stopped when walking and are staring blankly at a tree. Snap out of it. The cold is a physical reality, but it also becomes a mental state. It feels like it's inside you, chilling your thoughts, slowing your reactions. Your brain feels sluggish, encased in ice. Simple decisions, like whether to step left or right to avoid a patch of deep snow, require Herculean effort. It's the ultimate form of procrastination. Your brain is putting off essential functions because, frankly, it's just too cold to think. You might experience sudden, inexplicable bursts of emotion, a wave of overwhelming sadness, a flash of irrational anger, or even a brief, terrifying moment of pure panic before the numbness reasserts itself. These emotional spikes are like glitches in the system, reminders that there's still something human buried beneath the layers of ice and weariness, even if it's just screaming into the void. The line between memory and hallucination becomes incredibly thin. Did you really see that officer give away his last biscuit? Or was that a comforting invention of your starving mind? Was that shout for help real or just the wind playing tricks? You learn to trust nothing, not even your own senses. It's a truly trust-free zone out here, which is exhausting in itself. The constant state of being cold and hungry is like a persistent, low-level hum of misery that underpins everything. The dreams and delirium are just the static on top of that hum. They don't replace the suffering, they just twist it into new, creative, and often frustrating shapes. Like adding bizarre, abstract visuals to a documentary about how much everything hurts. You just keep moving. The shuffling rhythm is an anchor in the swirling mental fog. One step, drag. One step, drag. It's a meditation of desperation, a mantra of survival. The body, bless it, still remembers the basic programming, even when the mind is off on holiday somewhere warmer and considerably less snowy. You are, for the moment, a biological automaton operating on fumes and muscle memory. Amidst the relentless hallucinatory chaos described in the last section, your mind isn't all broken radios and phantom soup. Sometimes, if you're incredibly lucky, a tiny crack appears in the wall of misery and a sliver of something unexpectedly pleasant slips through. These moments are fleeting, fragile, and feel almost surreal in their contrast to the surrounding horror, like finding a perfectly ripe strawberry in the middle of an ice age. Perhaps you notice a particularly beautiful snowflake, perfectly formed, landing on your threadbare sleeve before melting away. It's a ridiculous thing to find beauty in, given the context that these tiny, innocent crystals are part of the thing actively trying to kill you. But there it is, a brief visual respite. Or maybe you stumble upon a patch of slightly less deep snow, offering a moment of easier passage, a tiny victory against the crushing resistance. It's like the universe threw you a bone, a very small, frozen bone, but you'll take it. There are moments of unexpected human connection too. You might see another soldier, equally ragged and half dead, share a tiny crumb of frozen ration they somehow hoarded, or offer a hand up if you stumble. These aren't grand gestures. They are quiet, desperate acts of shared humanity in a place where the human part is rapidly eroding. You exchange a look, a nod, maybe a flicker of understanding that says, "Yeah, this sucks. Glad you're here." Ish. It's a reminder that you aren't the only one experiencing this particular flavor of frozen hell, which is bizarrely a comfort. Misery loves company, apparently, especially company that smells vaguely of frostbite and desperation. Finding a discarded, slightly less frozen potato, or even just a handful of edible moss beneath a rock, remember that moss braid ration? Good times. Can feel like hitting the jackpot. It's a small, immediate physical relief, a tiny influx of calories that momentarily pushes back the gnawing emptiness in your stomach. Eating it might require chipping it away with your teeth and risking frostbite on your lips, but the feeling of something solid and faintly caloric sliding down your throat is a small luxury, almost indecently satisfying. A mainstream historical fact is that even during the most brutal stages of the retreat, accounts exist of soldiers showing remarkable acts of kindness and selflessness towards their comrades, sharing scarce resources or helping the injured despite their own peril. This contradicts the often portrayed image of every man for himself, suggesting that the bonds forged in shared hardship could sometimes transcend the instinct for individual survival. You might find a spot sheltered from the wind behind a large rock or a fallen tree. Stopping for just a few minutes, huddling down, feels like the greatest luxury imaginable. The wind cutting through your layers is a constant torment. Even a slight reduction in its icy assault is a profound relief. It's not warm by any stretch of the imagination, but it's less cold. You learn to appreciate the subtle nuances of freezing. A quirky or fringe tidbit involves reports of soldiers finding frozen remnants of campfires or abandoned equipment, and sometimes managing to salvage something useful. A slightly better pair of gloves, a discarded boot, oh, wouldn't that be a dream? Or even just a scrap of cloth to wrap around frostbitten ears. These finds, rare as they were, could provide a temporary boost in morale and practical aid, small treasures in a wasteland. There's an open scholarly debate about the extent to which these acts of altruism were widespread versus isolated incidents. While many memoirs and historical accounts highlight individual acts of heroism and camaraderie, historians still debate whether these were typical behaviors or exceptions in a general environment of breakdown and self-preservation. Was the retreat primarily defined by human decency or its absence? Sometimes the sheer monotony of the landscape is broken by something visually striking, the way the low sun hits the snow crystals, creating a blinding, sparkling expanse. Not great for your eyes, mind you, but undeniably beautiful in a harsh way. Or the silhouette of a lone, snow-laden tree against the gray sky. These moments of stark, natural beauty are fleeting and don't make you any warmer or less hungry, but they offer a brief, non-human distraction from the relentless internal focus on suffering. It's nature reminding you hey, I can be pretty too, even while I'm trying to freeze you solid. The feeling of your circulation returning, however painful, to a body part that was completely numb can be a strange, perverse sort of relief. The sharp, stinging ache is the body screaming, "Hey, still alive down here!" And while it hurts, it's better than the deadening absence of sensation. It's a reminder that your body is still fighting, still desperately trying to keep the engine running. Even a moment of clear thought, a brief period where the hallucinations subside and your mind feels sharp for a few seconds, can be a small joy. It's like a brief return to sanity, a reminder of who you are and where you are going before the fog inevitably rolls back in. You cling to that clarity, try to make a quick assessment of your situation before the brain starts broadcasting pirate radio again. You might find yourself whistling a tune, a half-forgotten melody from home, the sound thin and reedy in the vast silence. It's a small act of rebellion, a tiny assertion of life and memory against the encroaching death and forgetting. Or you might see a bird, a hardy raven or crow, making its way across the sky. Even that small sign of other life in this desolate expanse can lift your spirits, a reminder that the world isn't entirely dead. These small joys don't erase the pain or the danger. They don't magically give you a boot or a map or bring you any closer to salvation. But they are tiny, flickering candles in the overwhelming darkness. They are moments of unexpected grace, proof that even in the most brutal conditions, the capacity for connection, for beauty, and for finding solace in the smallest things can still exist. They are the crumbs your spirit feeds on, those brief flickers of beauty or kindness, those tiny cracks of light we talked about. They're precious, aren't they? Like holding onto a single, slightly warm ember in a freezing blizzard. But the storm is relentless, and the cold isn't just outside you. It's seeping in, chilling your bones, yes, but more insidiously, chilling your thoughts. The fleeting joy fades and the heavy gray reality descends again, often bringing with it a chorus of very unkind voices inside your own head. This stage of extreme survival isn't just about physical endurance. It's a brutal war against yourself. The constant exhaustion, the gnawing hunger, the ceaseless cold. They chip away at your willpower, eroding the very foundation of your determination. Self-doubt becomes a constant companion, whispering insidious questions. Why are you even trying? It asks, its voice as cold and sharp as the wind. Look at you. You're not going to make it. You are slow, you are weak, you have one boot for crying out loud. Just stop. The temptation is immense. To just stop, to sit down against a snowdrift, curl up, and let the cold take you. It promises relief, an end to the pain, the exhaustion, the constant struggle. Your muscles ache, your feet are numb, your head is swimming. Why not just surrender? It seems like the easiest, most logical thing to do. Your body screams for rest, your mind offers oblivion. It's a seductive proposition, a warm blanket of nothingness in the face of unimaginable suffering. And honestly, who would blame you? It takes an almost illogical stubbornness, a sheer refusal to accept defeat, to push past that overwhelming urge. Sometimes the mental deterioration manifests as strange, disjointed thoughts. The hallucinations might return, less comforting than phantom soup, perhaps, and more unsettling. Faces appearing in the swirling snow, distorted and menacing, or the landscape warping, becoming unfamiliar and threatening. You might talk to yourself, argue with imagined companions, or get lost in elaborate, nonsensical daydreams that feel jarringly real. Your internal radio is definitely still picking up pirate stations, and they are not playing calming ASMR tracks anymore. More like heavy metal static, this mental fog makes simple tasks incredibly difficult. Remembering which direction you are going, keeping track of time, even just putting one foot in front of the other with purpose. It all requires immense effort. Your brain feels sluggish, encased in ice. It's like trying to run a complex computer program on a potato powered by desperation. A mainstream historical fact is that psychological breakdown, including hallucinations, paranoia, and suicidal ideation, was a common outcome among soldiers during the extreme conditions of the retreat. The combination of starvation, exhaustion, freezing temperatures, and constant stress pushed many beyond the limits of human psychological resilience. Accounts describe men collapsing not just from physical failure, but from sheer mental collapse, unable to process the reality of their situation any longer. You might find yourself bargaining internally. Just make it to that tree. Then, just make it to that ridge. Eventually the goals shrink, they're becoming smaller and smaller, because thinking about the vast, endless distance still ahead is too crushing. You have to break it down into tiny, manageable increments, forcing your mind to focus only on the next 50 yards, the next minute. It's a desperate strategy, a way of tricking yourself into continuing when the big picture is too terrifying to contemplate. A quirky or fringe tidbit relates to the anecdotal reports of soldiers experiencing out-of-body sensations or feelings of dissociation during the most extreme cold and exhaustion. Some accounts describe watching themselves from a distance as if their mind had detached from their suffering body. While not universally documented, these fragmented reports suggest the mind's extraordinary, sometimes strange, ways of coping or failing to cope with overwhelming physical and psychological stress. There's an open scholarly debate about the exact physiological mechanisms behind the hallucinations and cognitive impairment experienced by soldiers in such conditions. While factors like hypothermia, dehydration, starvation, and sleep deprivation are clearly involved, historians still argue whether specific micronutrient deficiencies, stress-induced hormonal imbalances, or even underlying psychological predispositions played a more significant role in determining who succumbed to mental breakdown and who maintained their cognitive function. The voice of doubt isn't just about giving up physically, it attacks your identity, your worth. You're a failure, it hisses. You couldn't even keep both your boots. You're a disgrace to your uniform, assuming you still have one, which is a big assumption by now. This internal shaming adds another layer of misery, making you question every decision you have made, every step you've taken. It's like getting roasted by your own subconscious. And frankly, it's a pretty unfair audience review. Fighting this internal battle requires a different kind of strength than simply putting one foot in front of the other. It requires actively pushing back against the negative thoughts, clinging to any flicker of hope or purpose you can find. Maybe it's the memory of home, the faces of loved ones, or simply a sheer mule-headed refusal to let the cold and the snow win. It's saying, nope, not today, frostbite, not today, existential dread. You might try singing again, but the voice is weaker now, the tune more mournful, easily lost in the wind. Or you might repeat a mantra, a simple phrase like, keep walking, or home, 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 over and over, using it as an anchor against the mental drift. It's a small act of defiance, an attempt to impose some kind of order on the internal chaos. Sometimes the moments of clarity from the last section feel like cruel jokes, brief glimpses of sanity before being plunged back into the swirling confusion. You crave that clear thought, that ability to reason and plan, but it's a resource that's rapidly depleting, like trying to fill a sieve with snow. This internal war is quiet, unseen by anyone else, but it's just as deadly as the external dangers. The mind can break before the body does, leading to fatal mistakes, giving up too soon, or wandering off course into certain doom. Surviving this isn't just about physical toughness, it's about finding a way to grit your teeth and ignore the screaming, defeatist voice in your own skull. It's arguably the hardest part of the journey. The fight against the self is the final frontier. You stand on the riverbank, part of an enormous, milling crowd, and the sheer scale of the obstacle before you is breathtaking in its grim finality. This is the Berezina, a river perhaps 100 yards wide here, its dark water churning with chunks of ice. The air is frigid, and a biting wind whips off the surface, carrying the sound of distant Russian cannon fire and the desperate, frantic sounds of work happening closer by. The previous bridges are gone, destroyed. The main force is essentially trapped, with the river ahead and the Russians closing in behind. The only hope lies in building new ones, and quickly. Down by the water's edge, you see them, the pontooniers, the engineers. These aren't the infantry you march with. These are specialists, men trained to build bridges under pressure, and they are performing miracles or attempting to, wading into the near-freezing water. It's an almost unimaginable act of bravery and sacrifice. They're hacking at ice, driving piles into the riverbed, hauling heavy timbers. The sound of axes, saws, and hammers echoes constantly, a relentless, desperate soundtrack to the scene. Their breath hangs in the air like ghosts. You watch, helpless, along with thousands of others. There's nothing you can do. You don't have the tools, the training, or honestly, the strength to wade into that icy hell. You just shiver on the bank, pulling your threadbare coat tighter, watching these incredible doomed men work. You see some collapse from the pond, pulled semi-conscious from the water by their comrade. Others just keep working, driven by a sense of duty, or perhaps just the terrifying knowledge that if they stop, everyone, including themselves, is lost. The process is agonizingly slow. Building two bridges, one for infantry and another, sturdier one for wagons and artillery, under ideal conditions would be a major feat. Doing it here in freezing water with limited tools, exhausted men, and under the constant threat of enemy fire is beyond heroic. It's almost absurd. It's like asking a bunch of guys who've been on their feet for weeks, eating bark, to suddenly construct a modern suspension bridge using only spoons and harsh language. The crowd around you is a mixture of emotions. There's hope, raw and desperate, that the bridges will be finished. There's fear of the Russians, who are getting closer, their artillery rounds occasionally landing near the river. And there's impatience. A low murmur ripples through the masses whenever progress seems to slow. Some men try to edge closer to the bank, jockeying for position for when the crossing finally begins. Officers yell, trying to maintain some semblance of order, but their authority is thin here, stretched to breaking point by the overwhelming chaos. A quirky tidbit about this infamous crossing is that the engineers primarily responsible, particularly General Jean-Baptiste Blay and his Dutch pontooniers, went to extraordinary lengths, even burning their own field equipment and homes for materials when wood ran short. Many of them worked continuously for days in the icy water, without rest or adequate food, succumbing rapidly to hypothermia and frostbite. Their dedication was absolute. You look at your own feet, still aching and numb inside your worn boots. The thought of stepping into that water is terrifying. Even standing on the bank, the cold seems to radiate up from the river. You see men trying to warm their hands over tiny fires, but fuel is scarce and the wind quickly whips away any heat. Discarded equipment litters the ground, muskets, backpacks, shakos, symbols of a military order that has completely broken down. Survival is now the only uniform. One mainstream historical fact often highlighted is that the decision to destroy the bridges Napoleon had previously used further upstream significantly limited his options and forced this desperate, high-risk crossing at the Berezina against a gathering enemy force. It turned a difficult retreat into a potential massacre point. It's hard not to feel like a rat cornered in a trap, with the river as the cheese you have to swim through to get out. The hours tick by with agonizing slowness. You shift your weight, trying to keep the blood flowing in your legs. The sun, a pale, cold disk, makes its slow arc across the sky and begins to dip towards the horizon again. The bridges are taking shape, incredibly. They look fragile, rickety, like they might collapse under the weight of a single wagon, let alone an entire army. But they are there, a narrow pathway of wood stretching across the dark, icy water. Historians still argue whether Napoleon himself should have ordered the army to cross immediately upon reaching the river with whatever means available, rather than waiting for the bridges to be fully completed, potentially sacrificing the artillery and wagons but saving more lives. Looking at the bottleneck that is about to form, the argument for just getting across, any way possible, seems compelling from your freezing, terrified perspective. The work continues into the twilight. By flickering torchlight and the dim glow of the moon, the engineers labor on. You hear shouts of encouragement, or maybe just grim determination. You see figures stumble and fall, lost to the icy grip of the river. It's a scene of immense human suffering and remarkable human endurance, happening side by side. The air crackles with tension. Everyone knows the crossing is imminent. The bottleneck will be immense, and not everyone is going to make it across before the Russians arrive in force. You try not to think about that. You focus on the bridge, just the bridge, willing it to hold. The word spreads like wildfire, a ripple of desperate energy through the freezing mass. The bridges are ready, or ready enough, anyway. It's not an orderly announcement. It's just a sudden, surging movement from the back towards the riverbank. And you are caught in it. There's no choice but to move forward with the crowd, a vast, panicked body pushing toward the two fragile threads stretched across the dark water. It's an instant, overwhelming crush. People are jostling, shouting, pushing, not just soldiers, but women and children who follow the army, wounded men, camp followers, all driven by the primal urge to get to the other side, away from the approaching Russian guns whose dull roar is now a constant, terrifying presence. You stumble forward, propelled by the pressure from behind. Your feet, already numb, complain as you're forced to move faster than you can manage on the uneven, icy ground. The sound is deafening. The roar of the crowd, the cracking of ice near the bank, the rhythmic thudding of artillery in the distance, and the terrifying groans and splintering sounds coming from the bridges themselves under the sudden onslaught of weight. It's like being trapped in a living, breathing avalanche of humanity and fear. Forget personal space. Your concept of it is about to be permanently recalibrated. You are just one molecule in this desperate, flowing current. Getting onto the bridge is an ordeal in itself. It's a bottleneck of monumental proportions. The crowd compresses, everyone trying to squeeze onto the narrow wooden planks. People are slipping on the icy surface, falling, and in moments they are being trampled. There's no time for help, no space to stop. You have to keep moving, focusing only on the wooden planks beneath your feet, trying not to look down at the churning water and ice flows below. It's less like walking and more like being squeezed through a tube, praying you don't get squished. Honestly, trying to get onto a busy subway train during rush hour feels positively leisurely compared to this. And nobody is actively trying to stab you or push you into freezing water there. The bridge for the infantry is narrower, constantly swaying and creaking. The sturdier one, meant for wagons and artillery, is slightly better but equally congested. You find yourself on the infantry bridge, packed shoulder to shoulder, moving at a snail's pace dictated by the crush ahead. The air is thick with the smell of wet wool, unwashed bodies, fear, and the sharp metallic tang of blood. Every so often, a gap appears where someone has fallen through the planks or simply slipped off the side, swallowed by the dark river and the grinding ice. You hear cries cut short, And then the terrifying awareness that that could be you flashes through your mind. A quirky tidbit about the Berezina crossing is the sheer number of non-combatants who accompany the army: wives, mistresses, servants, merchants. Their presence dramatically increased the congestion and casualties at the bridges. Imagine taking your entire extended family on a grueling, deadly camping trip, and then trying to fit everyone and their luggage into two tiny rowboats while being shot at. It was a logistical nightmare compounded by human misery. You grip the threadbare fabric of the person in front of you, or perhaps just their backpack, anything for stability. The movement is jerky, stop and go. Moments of terrifying stillness when the bridge seems to groan under the weight, followed by sudden lurches forward as space opens up or desperate individuals push through. You see horses panicking, their eyes wide with terror, being forced onto the bridge, their hooves slipping on the wood. Wagons laden with what little remained of supplies or personal belongings are being pushed and pulled, sometimes tumbling off the sides into the river, their contents scattering. One mainstream historical fact about this event is that General Ible, the engineer, despite his own failing health from exposure, stayed by the bridges for as long as humanly possible, desperately trying to keep order and ensure as many as possible could cross. He even reportedly ordered the destruction of pontoon equipment earlier in the campaign. Except for the bridge building tools, foresight that saved thousands here, though costing him and most of his men their lives within days from the ordeal. A truly heroic, if ultimately tragic figure. The hours on the bridge are a blur of cold, terror, and exhaustion. You feel the biting wind off the water chilling you to the bone. Splashes of icy water come up through the gaps in the planks. Your legs ache from standing and being jostled. Your mind feels numb, focused only on putting one foot in front of the other, following the slow, agonizing shuffle across. It's like being stuck in the world's worst queue, where falling out means instant hypothermia and probable death. Someone cracks a dark, humorless joke about whether the other side has better catering, but the sound is lost in the general din. Historians still argue whether Napoleon's strategic focus shifted too early to preserving his imperial guard and key units, potentially abandoning large numbers of stragglers and non-combatants to the mercy of the approaching Russians at the Berezina. From your perspective, stuck in the middle of this desperate scramble, it certainly feels like those not in organized, disciplined units are facing the brunt of the chaos and the highest risk. Order is breaking down entirely. It's every person for themselves on these rickety planks. As night falls completely, the scene becomes even more nightmarish, illuminated by occasional flares of distant artillery fire and the flickering light of fires on the far bank. The groaning of the bridges seems louder, more ominous. You hear the sickening crunch of wood splintering. There are points where you have to step over fallen bodies. People who couldn't take the cold, the crush, or simply lost their footing and were left behind. It's a grim, unending procession of misery and sheer, desperate will to survive. You push on, focused only on the far bank, a dim promise of safety through the swirling snow that has started to fall again. Just keep moving. Don't stop. Don't look down. Finally, after what felt like an eternity suspended over the freezing void, the movement slows, then stops. The pressure from behind eases ever so slightly as people ahead manage to filter off the end of the bridge. You take one last agonizing step off the splintered wood and onto solid ground. Well, solid ground covered in knee-deep snow, churned mud, ice, and discarded equipment. It feels weirdly stable, like suddenly remembering what it's like to stand on something that isn't actively trying to buck you into oblivion. There's no immediate order, no reception committee handing out warm blankets and hot cocoa. Shocking, I know. Just more chaos, albeit a slightly less kinetic version than the bridge itself. People are collapsing all around you, literally just falling face first into the snow, too spent to take another step. Fires are scattered here and there, feeble sparks in the vast darkness, surrounded by huddled, silent figures who made it across earlier. The air is thick with the smell of burning wood, wet clothes, and the lingering scent of gunpowder and fear from the distance. The sounds are different now. The roar of the crowd on the bridge is behind you, replaced by the crackle of fires, the groan of the other bridge still under immense strain, and the dull, persistent boom of Russian artillery that is perhaps a little closer than you'd like, even on this side. Your body protests every millisecond. The aching in your legs is a dull roar that drowns out everything else. Your feet feel like blocks of ice, entirely devoid of sensation. Your hands, somehow still clinging to the remnants of your meager possessions, are stiff claws. Every muscle screams in protest. You stumble a few steps away from the immediate crush of the bridge exit, drawn towards the promise of any respite, any flattish spot where you can just stop moving. That's the only thought echoing in the exhausted void of your mind. You manage to shuffle over towards a large, snow-covered mound, maybe a fallen wagon, maybe just a drift, and slide down its side. The snow is cold and wet, instantly soaking through your already damp layers. But frankly, you're beyond caring about wetness. The sheer relief of being off your feet is overwhelming. You lean your head back against the icy surface behind you, closing your eyes. The world outside immediately starts to recede. The sounds of the camp, the distant guns, the cries from the bridge, they all seem to fade, muffled as if heard through thick layers of wool. A quirky tidbit from survivors' accounts tells of soldiers who, upon reaching the far bank, were so completely spent that they would immediately strip off their freezing, wet clothes right there in the snow, convinced the dry cold would be better than the wet cold, only to quickly succumb to hypothermia. Your own clothes feel like ice encasing you, but the thought of trying to remove them feels like an insurmountable task, like trying to build another pontoon bridge yourself. So you just stay put, shivering uncontrollably, but too tired to even register the full force of the cold as pain anymore. It's just there. You remember the moss-bred rations, the frozen boot, the endless trudge. It all feels like a dream now, a distant, hazy memory. Did that really happen? Did you really walk all that way? It seems impossible. But here you are on the other side of the treacherous Berezina, one of the lucky, or perhaps just stubborn, few who made it across this watery grave. It's not exactly five-star accommodation, mind you, more like -5-star, open-air camping where bears are probably more comfortable than you are. But you're off the bridge. That counts for something, right? One mainstream historical fact about the Berezina crossing is the staggering number of lives lost. Estimates vary wildly, but it's generally accepted that tens of thousands perished, either in the river, on the bridges, or immediately afterwards from exposure and exhaustion. It wasn't just a military defeat. It was a humanitarian catastrophe on a scale that shocked Europe. Trying to count the bodies afterwards would have been like trying to count snowflakes in a blizzard. You try to shift position to get more comfortable, but your limbs feel heavy and unresponsive. Your face is numb, your breath comes in ragged gasps. The cold is a physical weight pressing down on you. But beneath the cold, a different sensation is rising. A powerful, irresistible urge. Sleep. The kind of deep, absolute exhaustion that feels like the only thing your body is capable of doing anymore. Forget hunger. Forget thirst. Forget the danger. Your system is screaming for rest. A total shutdown to process the unimaginable strain it has been under for weeks. It's like hitting the off switch after your internal battery has been running on fumes for way too long. Historians still argue whether the Berezina crossing, despite the horrific losses, should be considered a successful delaying action that allowed Napoleon and a core remnant of his army to escape, or if it was the final chaotic nail in the coffin of the Grande Armée as a functional fighting force. For you right now, it feels less like strategic history and more like you just survived the world's worst school trip, and all you want is to lie down. You don't even try to fight it. There's no energy left for resistance. The sounds fade further. The flickering lights of the fires blur into indistinct glows behind your eyelids. The sharp edge of the cold begins to soften, replaced by a dull, heavy ache. Your thoughts slow, becoming disjointed, nonsensical. You feel yourself sinking down into the soft, deceptive embrace of exhaustion. It's not warmth, but it's an end to the pain of being awake, of having to move, of having to think. The snow is your blanket, The frozen ground your bed, the distant cannons a lullaby. You just let go. The world outside becomes a distant hum, then fades entirely. You are sleeping. All right, as the icy wind sings its lullaby over the Berezina, and our weary traveler finally succumbs to the deep, heavy sleep of utter exhaustion, it's time for you to do the same. Let the images of the endless snow, the creaking bridges, and the quiet collapse on the far bank gently drift away. They're just echoes from a difficult journey, and you are safe and warm, tucked away in your own space. Feel the comfort of your bed, the softness of your pillow. Let the tension drain from your body, starting from your toes and slowly moving upwards, releasing every muscle, every joint. Breathe in slowly, deeply, and breathe out, letting go of any lingering thoughts or worries. This moment is just for you. There's nothing left to do, nowhere left to go except deeper into the quiet, restful darkness. The long march is over. The struggle along is won. Just peace now. You are drifting into a calm, soothing sleep.